What is dopamine addiction and how does it affect those with PTSD? Well, a lot of you will be surprised to know, I myself was very surprised to find out that dopamine addiction is actually a hypothesis. It's not rooted in any sort of fact right now. Of course, people are studying it a lot and it's being trounced around in the media all over, the internet and so forth, but it still is just a theory. Dopamine is more closely related to the anticipation of a reward, such as sex or food, and that's how it originally was developed throughout evolution in our bodies and also in animal bodies to drive us to find food, to drive us to procreate and have sex and continue, our species, rather than the actual outcome of a reward. It's not like we get those things and then we get our dopamine fix and we're like, oh, good, that was great. It's like a drug, and then we go on to the next thing. That's a misconception. Talia Lerner, she's an assistant professor at Northwestern of neuroscience. She describes it as it teaches your brain how to predict your needs, and then it tries to align your behaviors with those actual needs. So we just wouldn't have made it this far, or survived without dopamine and that whole neurotransmitter system being in our bodies, right? And now, obviously, that has a different effect on us as we've quickly been thrust into this, technocratic, system that we now live in, where our sex is on our pockets and you can just swipe it, on your phone all day, or where our food, of course, isn't natural at all. It comes from like a bag like this or a freaking fancy box. So how does that all play into like our modern lives? Of course, that's a pretty loaded question with not a lot of answers. But there's a theory that's similar to drugs, like we mentioned, cocaine and amphetamine, that the more you get dopamine and find your dopamine, however you find it, that your tolerance is going to increase, and you're going to need more and more and more of those dopamine hits in order to reach your equilibrium or to be satisfied, right? The problem is with that, if you were to relate that to like video games or pornography or junk food or scrolling around on social media all day, when you talk about drugs and like amphetamine, for instance, you're talking about a rush, a massive rush, or combat, right? A massive rush of dopamine. Your body has never, ever dealt with such a rush or such amounts of dopamine, right? And that's why after a sustained amount of using drugs or a sustained amount of combat, your dopamine levels do decrease so significantly. And then it takes so much, such like dramatic things just to get a little hit of dopamine. But that still does not denote the fact that, or the theory that we have to seek out that dopamine through other things like social media, pornography, all that kind of crap, right? Because those things are given to you in small, tiny, tiny little amounts in comparison to combat or comparison to drugs, right? So that's the major argument right now that scientists use against this dopamine addiction theory. Also, the second one is that it isn't chemically induced at all, right? And I know that's arguable when you look at our food. Of course, we're being pumped with chemicals all day, every day. But those things such as like scrolling on your phone or engaging in risky behaviors, all that other stuff, right? It isn't external chemicals coming into your system to open up those dopamine receptors and transfer more dopamine. It's not that, it's naturally being produced in your body to anticipate a certain reward or to drive you towards a certain reward. So the data just isn't there yet, right? Maybe it will get there eventually. But also attention spans shouldn't be conflated or correlated with dopamine addiction either, because that's just not scientifically valid yet either. Science does show a decreasing attention span, and of course we all know that. I mean, shoot, it's hard to even read like an actual news article nowadays other than like the blurb headline and then move on to the next thing and the next thing, right? We all know that's true. But that correlation between the attention spans and then any kind of dopamine surge or dopamine addiction, just the science is not there in the middle yet. It isn't. Another counterpart to dopamine addiction theory is that the urges that drive people to eat junk food, to engage, in risky behaviors, to scroll on social media all day, every day, right? And hear those little bells and whistles and check your messages, whatever it is, right? Or actually getting your sex on a screen or an iPad or something rather than actually going out and finding somebody, to engage with and to have a relationship with, right? Those urges are so vast, and they're biological, they're environmental, there's so much to them, right, that drives a person to do these things other than simply blaming it on one little neurotransmitter in our body, dopamine. It's not there. Furthermore, experimental attempts to treat addiction and dopamine or with dopamine have utterly failed so far. I mean, there's just absolutely no evidence behind it. They haven't been able to produce any kind of favorable results. Two such studies are very similar where they're using dopamine to treat people with combat PTSD. One such study is in Russia right now, and then another study is over in California with Army veterans or military veterans. So we're going to talk about those and highlight exactly what they're studying and what kind of results they've had so far in the third video. So check it out.